Cool. So you worked at Columbia?
From 64 to 67.
Okay. But you started earlier than that, right? Or was Columbia?
Oh, I was mixing even in 59.
Oh, wow.
Did Silhouettes by the Rays.
I overheard you telling a story at our last gathering about 16 Candles. Could you, and I only got a little tiny part of it.
It was funny because I was working for Audio Labs, mastering Westminster and Vanguard and those for tape duplication.
Okay.
And running the duplicator as well.
Okay.
And a fellow named, who worked at NBC at the time, I think, or later did, Al Magacy. And he came up to me one day and he said, my friends at Regent in the city need an engineer. And he said, you ought to go talk to them. He said, because you've done a lot of remote stuff. And I said, sure. So I interviewed with Bob Lifton, who was a prince. I mean, the man was absolutely class A. And he hired me on the spot. And it was about a day later, Friday morning, and he said to me, we all want to get away for a 3-day weekend. We got a little demo session coming in tonight. Will you cover it? And I said, sure. And so in comes a full orchestra, 8 background singers, lead vocal,
8 background
Johnny
singers.
Maestro. It was a 16 Candles session.
Wow.
We only had 12 inputs on the console. The console was a Longevin preamp and line amp console. Rock solid. But we only had one mono machine, and I think at that time he had a stereo machine, but it was done mono, and it was done as a demo. And I had to keep moving the background singers away from 2 sides of a 44 BX because I needed to get 8 voices down one microphone. And so I did that.
That was a figure 8?
Yeah.
So you could place them on opposite sides. And, yeah.
But their levels would change, so I would have to physically, you know, adjust them. The fact that it was a demo, they pay a lesser rate, but they only get to keep 1 take. And that was take 13. And I was supposed to reuse the tape with the previous takes on the next demo. And I just said, I made enough mistakes that I have to know that I'm never going to make those again. And I took takes 1 to 12 home with me, and I still have them somewhere in storage in the library.
Awesome.
And so we were off and running, and it must have been 3 or 4 days later, I'm at my girlfriend's house, and there it is on the radio. So it was like, wow. And then about 2 weeks later, I got a letter from Charlie Brave at Allegro Studios offering me $250 a week, which is a lot of money in those days.
Right. When you could rent an apartment for $50 a month or something.
And I went to Bob Lifton and I showed him the letter and I said, is this legit? He says, Charlie's a good person. If he made you that offer, he will do that. He said, I can't match that. So I would say to you, take the offer. Well, Allegro was a bit run down in comparison to Regent.
Is that in the city here too, Allegro?
That was 1650 Broadway in the basement.
Okay, and Regent was in the city here too.
Regent was 56th Street between 5th or 6th and 5th.
Okay.
And Charlie's setup was 2, I don't know if you remember the early Ampex mixers, the 4-knob mixer, 3761s.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It was microphone in and microphone out. Okay? He had 2 of these strapped together going through a Longevin line amp into 2 mono machines. Well, we did Silhouettes by the Rays, Love is Strange, Mickey and Sylvia.
Oh, wow.
Billy and Lily, the Chiffons, He's So Fine.
No way, you did that one?
Yeah.
Oh man, that was my favorite song for about 20 years.
God, I can't remember the Every Mother's Son with Come On Down to My Boat, the album.
Sure.
For Wes Farrell.
Wow.
trying to remember who else we did with Slay and Crew. Bob Crew just died recently, by the way. And I did want to get to see him before he died. Didn't do it. He's up in Vermont, was up in Vermont. But we did a slew of things there. And Mickey Baker of Mickey and Sylvia played guitar at my wedding.
Wow, really?
I had the crew there. They wouldn't take any money from me, which was very sad because I wanted to make sure they were paid.
Wow.
But it was a good time. And it was, in the party was Jimmy Breedlove, who played bongos. It was Mickey Baker on guitar, Dole Stickens on bass. Who was the pianist? Was it Bert Keys? I'm trying to remember. I'd have to go back to the photo and look at it. But that whole group played at the wedding.
Wow.
And then in '62, I got a draft notice. And Harvey Radio at the time was a big broadcast and recording distributor. Not the little store they are today with Home Hi-Fi.
Right.
And Ed Lewin, who was a salesman there upstairs, got wind of the fact that I got drafted. And he called Armed Forces Radio and said, you want somebody to align your machines, to repair your Ampexes, to take care of everything and build you a new studio? You get this man. Well, in the course of things in the Army, they give you these tests to find out what you're most adapted to. Didn't mean shit. At the end of basic training, everybody that got expert on the rifle range and who was my size and build got NP service. So I took the orders back up to Armed Forces Radio and showed them to the captain. And I wanted to leave the room. He got on the phone and talked to some secretary at the Pentagon. And he lambasted her just up and down. I was embarrassed.
Wow. And
he slammed the phone down and he said, you go home at 6 o'clock in the morning, there'll be a change of orders at your front door. And there was.
Wow.
So they took me and I rebuilt the studios and maintained all the Ampexes. For a civilian man, Ed Bovey. I don't know if you've ever known him. It was a strange situation because it was all the services were working there. And the Navy commander would come in and he'd take a top-of-the-line ham transceiver and leave, and you never saw it again. I mean, it was just...
one of those kind of deals.
And then he got on my tail because I refused to go on a slate roof to mount an antenna for him. And I said to him...
Slate roof, like...
Real pitch. And I said to him, slate roof especially, not at that pitch, I'm not going up there.
Yeah.
Oh, he broke my nuts for the last 6 months of my working there. But very ungrateful guy. And I subsequently found out that he got an award for rebuilding the studios. Okay? I found that out later. So when I came,
didn't share anything with you.
No.
No.
Yeah. I didn't care.
No, but that's a character indicator right there.
And it was, I lived at home and got a stipend, small stipend for living at home. But I worked in civilian clothes for 2 years. And then I worked for ABC at night on the FM side for them. And when I got out of the service, I went back to Allegro. But then they sold to, what was the name of the record company? Bruce Staple came in as the general manager for Laurie Records, bought Allegro. And it wasn't the same situation at all. So one of the fellows in passing, it's funny because at night, after sessions, I would stop in the coffee shop and either have dinner or a cup of coffee. And who would sit there with me but the head of Motown.
Barry Gordy?
Barry Gordy would be sitting there. Now at Allegro, we also did all the demos with Carole King and Jerry Goffin and Neil Sedaka. Funny thing, because about 3 years ago, a young lady on, what the hell was the website, Spectre Pop, emailed me and said, we didn't hear much of Carole King in those days, publicity-wise. Do you have any idea why? And I emailed her, supposedly emailed her back, that one of the experiences I had at Allegro was her husband, she was pregnant at the time, and Jerry Goffin, her husband, was really, really beyond rude to her. I mean, treated her like a piece of dirt. To the point where one day she picked up a glass Coke bottle and heaved it across the studio at him. And unfortunately it missed. He should have been bopped in the head with it. He was that evil. And so I said to her, perhaps she's not happy in those days and would rather not discuss them. When my reply got back on Spectropop, it didn't even resemble anything I said. It was totally changed. So I said to Spectropop, F you, I'm finished with you. Don't even bother me again. If this is what you're going to do to an honest reply, not interested. And so one of the fellows said to me, Columbia's hiring. And so I went over and took an interview with Friedman, Roy Friedman, and on the spot was taken in. He evidently knew of the stuff I had done, his sessions and so on.
And what was Roy Friedman's job? Because I don't know.
He was head of
I know nothing about
the recording studio at
Okay.
7th Avenue, 52nd Street.
Okay.
And he was fine, but it was a typical union, I have to say it, chicken shit arrangement. On the first week I was there, the shop steward comes in and he says to me, slow down. I said, what's the matter? You're making us look bad. I said, I'm here to work, what are you here for? Okay, he didn't like that answer. We eventually became very good friends.
What was your job at that time?
He was just another engineer like us.
So you were an engineer. You were mixing
remix and setting up tapes for mastering, outside tapes for mastering.
Okay.
And the reason why I was hustling is Barney Beck, who was the manager of our section at night, his desk was piled high with work, and he was really bogged down. And very often you'd get the day crew held over with overtime. So there was one night I come in, we didn't have a room for you. So Barney says, have a seat somewhere and take a book. And I said to him, what about Tony Janik's room? Now all Tony Janik had a separate room with a 2-track to 2-track, and all he did was make 15-inch tape copies for Japan and England. That's all he did all week long. But you couldn't use the room because he would lock the AC switch panel. And I said to Barney, I said, I'm going to open the room up, give me the work, and I'll take care of it for you. And I just took the 4 screws out of the panel, of the switch panel, and lifted one of the ceiling tiles and shoved it up in the ceiling and put the tile back in place. And I figured, let him get the answer. Somebody else has to be able to use this room during the day, or during the night. The next day, Friedman comes down at the start of the crew, and he said, I don't want to know who did it, just do me a favor, put it back, it won't be locked anymore. Okay, so I got my point across.
All right.
But they were, the room next to me had, I shared Eddie Mikowski's room, which was 619, and 620 was Frank Decker. And there were 3 machines always set up in the room, a 3-track, a 2-track, and a mono. And work that night called for me not to use a 3-track, but a second 2-track. And so I moved the 3-track aside and I put a 2-track. The next night, I got the news that Decker complained. He disturbed my setup, you know, big deal. I mean, one plug, give me a break. So I figured if he's so in need of machines, and I took all the machines from the hallway, which was about 10 machines, and put them all in his room. So he had every machine he could ever need. And of course, the next night he come in, he could barely get the door open to get in the room. That's one thing Don Meehan could laugh and tell you about, because he saw that and he bust out laughing because he knew the situation. And then we had, what was his name? I could see his face because he was a machine man up in Studio A. And he would sneak down the hall, and in each of the rooms facing 7th Avenue, we had these big wooden drape-covered panels that would close out the noise from the street. But if one room wasn't used at night, well, when he was done mastering, he'd run down to the room in the dark, open the things up with a pair of binoculars and watch the hookers across in a hotel across the street. So we devised a cup of water and a paper clip into a piece of paper, another paper clip up over the door, so that when he opened the door, just dropped a cup of water on him, okay? He'd go running up to Barney, complaining like hell, but we were in there. In the meantime, mopped everything up with a towel, took everything down, and he'd bring Barney down to show him what happened, and there'd be nothing there, you know. And Barney knew what we were doing. He was a good skate. Barney was super. But we got a lot of work done, and then Larry Keyes was a machine man one night for, I think it was a Streisand session, and I'm mixing with Andy Casson, the classical producer, and Barney Beck and Roy Halley come in the door, rushed in the door and said, "Stop, George, we need you upstairs." I said, no, I'm not allowed upstairs. I have no seniority. I'm not allowed upstairs. You guys don't understand. I'm not allowed to go upstairs. No, we need you. So they dragged me upstairs, and Larry Keyes was all upset, and of course everything was in pandemonium. And he said, every time I push the record button, it blows the fuse. It's a simple circuit. It's a half-wave rectifier with a capacitor and out to the record button. Now, if that's being shorted to ground, yeah, it's going to blow a fuse. So without thinking, I took the push button, had a high riser on the record button so you couldn't accidentally hit it. And I unscrewed that, I dropped the switch down from the panel, wrapped it with black electrical tape, and I said to him, "You're good to go, you're just going to have to hit the switch down here." And they looked at me like, "Nah, what do you know that we don't know?" You know. But it really...
That worked.
Oh, worked fine. Yeah. And they, of course, Streisand, you don't interrupt Streisand, you don't delay her, you don't cause her any grief in the studio. Don't do it. So it was a standing joke. But the idea that the only night person for maintenance on couldn't fix anything like that. All he could do is roll another machine in for you. Well, at the time, it was their first 8-track, and it was a pair of stereo 354s tied together. So they had no replacement machine. They were dead in the water if we didn't get it running. But that was long a standing joke in the place. I should be working in maintenance. And they had good facilities. And the one thing about Columbia, everything was rock solid. I mean, the console was first rate. The mixing stuff was all Langevin, first rate. There was no, I mean, when I went after Columbia, after I realized, hey, I'm never going to get up to the studio. I'll be too old. I'll be collecting, Social Security by the time I get up there. That's when I went out to Mira Sound. And Mira Sound, I was there only maybe a month, and I had a 2-inch video recorder, big 1000. And I said to Bob Goldman, who owned the studio, I said, let's get Ampex to make us a set of 16-track heads and make this deck into a record. We had enough electronics between us. In fact, I had enough alone to make a 16-track. And so we had dinner at the Cattleman restaurant with Leon Wertman, who was the representative in the area for Ampex. And we sketched out on a cloth napkin exactly what we had and what we wanted to do. Would you guys make the heads for us? Yeah. Leon went back to California, and 2 days later he called and he said, it's going to have an Ampex name on it. We want to build it for you. Which they did and leased it to us. So I enjoyed the fact that I was the first engineer to use 16-track from Ampex.
Cool. So you had a transport that was something else, and they wanted to...
It was a video 2-inch transport.
Was it an Ampex video or something? Okay, so I'm confused.
And their transport had a different head cover on it, but basically used all the same parts.
Yeah.
The difference is, on the first one they made for us, there were no head lifters. So I had to build muting circuits so that in rewind, it would mute, otherwise you bang the meters to death, and take out tweeters.
Right.
And
cool.
The day that came in, we had the cables made up. We couldn't get it in the control room because there was no room at the time. And so I quickly had cables already made up to run from the console to the machine.
And what room was this?
Mira Sound.
Yeah. They had one room.
In the Hotel America, 165 West 47th.
Okay.
And our first session was done the night that we got the machine. We uncrated it in the morning. And the first session done on that machine was With This Ring by the Platters.
Yeah.
And that was produced by Luther Dixon, who was a prince. Nice guy. And we did a lot of work with him with the Skyliners and the Platters, Charlie and Inez Fox, with Mockingbird. They were the first ones to do Mockingbird.
Right.
And then Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. Now, Mira Sound was an individual thing. I had worked with Bob Crew all before going into service. Once he found out I was in the service, he was down at Mira Sound to work with me. Bob Goldman made me a contract where studio time was $100 an hour for 16 track in those days. And he made me a contract where I got 40% of the studio billing time. I would bring the clients in. And so at one point I went up to Roy Halley and I said, Roy, you can make a lot of money here. I considered Roy a better engineer in that respect than I am. But Mira Sound was a copy console of Bell Sound. He had literally copied Bell Sound's console.
Which was what?
Bell Sound was...
and what kind of console?
It was Dave and Faders.
Okay.
And it was only a 4-track board. So there had to be outside mixers feeding the other channels.
Right.
And I wound up using so many outside mixers that I literally used the console for remix while we were doing the session. And I said to Roy, you can make a lot of money here. But Roy, I think, was spoiled by the console of Columbia. And granted, it was much better console. And I hadn't even been aware that Roy left Columbia and went with A&R until I saw some of the emails about getting together today.
Oh.
I had not been aware that he went there.
Wow.
And I wonder what prodded him to leave Columbia and go to Mira Sound, because he had it made at Columbia. I mean, he just, he turned out excellent stuff at Columbia.
Yeah. And regarding the consoles and everything being rock solid, I mean, they must have been really solid because they were abused like crazy.
Oh yeah, but they were well built.
Yeah.
Built like battleships. And with quality items. Nothing shortchanged. They had home-built amplifiers that would mix the live sound and a delayed feed to the chamber.
Right.
And that was the slapback that you would hear with Tony Bennett and all those.
Yes, which was earlier tape, but then they put in some kind of bucket brigade delay or something.
Well, it was a mixing unit that it was like a wand in your shower today. You have a wand where you can control hot to cold, and this would control the mix between the two.
Right.
But they had a lot of specialized things that they made themselves, and they were always built. The equalizers and the consoles were built by a subsidiary of Harvey Radio in upstate New York, and I have 16 of them. You could get anything you wanted out of Columbia when they got through with it, if you knew Tony Janik. Tony Janik supplied me with one of the new 16-track console shells when they closed 799. No equipment in it, but there was a shell. You wanted to build your own, it was there.
Wow. So the consoles were not built by Columbia maintenance staff. They were spec'd and built by Harvey.
Well, the equalizers were, but the rest of it, I think, was built in-house.
Oh, okay.
And they had good facilities, and the design was excellent. I mean, it was just nothing half-assed, is the only way I could put it.
Yeah, and when you were there, it was still the rotary fader.
Yes, but he would locate them
staggered
so that you could hold the 1.5-inch centers. Okay?
So you could what?
Hold 1.5-inch centers.
Okay, right.
Each module could be narrower because you didn't have the knobs riding on one another.
Right.
What else did they have? It used to fascinate me. I ran machines for Fred Plout one day on the weekend, and it was a Broadway show. And Fred went out, he set up all the microphones, and he came in, run up all the knobs on the console, and I'll be damned if the first take wasn't perfect. I mean, he knew that room and that console that well.
Yeah.
And very friendly guy. I have his book.
The picture book or a bio?
No, a picture book.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. It wasn't a thick book. It was a black, thin book.
Do you remember the title of it? Because he has a book of pictures of photographs that he took.
Of people he worked with.
Of people he saw, or not only people he worked with, but people...
It's been a while since I've seen the book. What upended me is we had a fire and everything had to go into storage.
Oh, wow.
So I'm still unpacking.
Oh, no. Oh, ouch. How long ago was that?
Just about 3 years ago.
Oh, brother.
And we were out of the house 2 years and 3 months.
Oof.
Because of bogus inspections.
Oh.
If you ever have a fire, don't take the recommendation of the firemen for restoration. Call your insurance company and ask them who they've had a good relationship with as far as rebuilding houses. And that's the person you want to use. Having never been through it before, we went to a restoration company that turned out to be nothing more than a Liberty travel service. You know, you need a flight here, well, we'll book you to that. They didn't do the work themselves, they were always subcontracted. And they sent, after the fire, which was a furnace fire, if my wife hadn't woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning, we'd both be dead now. And she shook me, and I never got dressed so fast in my life. Black smoke everywhere. I come down, I opened the door to go down to the den where the furnace room was, and I was instantly black head to toe. I mean, just like somebody sprayed me. And I've never had heat in my face like that before. The den, which was beyond that room, is filled with 15-inch 2-track library and 3-track library. It's all acetate. And so I knew I couldn't let it get that far. So got my wife out of the house, she called a fireman, and I opened the garage door. I heard the furnace running, opened the garage door, killed the circuit breaker for the furnace, and I always keep 2 big CO2 professional extinguishers in the house, and let some of the heat vent, and I opened the door, took a deep breath, opened the door, and went down. The furnace was this high in flames. And what happened is the bearing on the blower motor froze.
Whoa!
So the CDS cell says, oh, we got flame, everything is okay, keep going. And it would pump oil in, and as the oil was running out, it was on fire, crawled over to the wall, it was going up the wall.
Wow.
But I put the furnace out and I shot the wall, but it would come back alive to raw embers, you know, in 15 seconds. I figured, screw me, I'm dead. It didn't get, luckily the firemen were there, it didn't get to the library at all.
Wow, great.
But
wow.
They sent in an asbestos inspector, because in the old days they would mix asbestos with the plaster on the wire lath in the bathrooms. And he comes in, he takes samples, he disappears for a week, he comes back a week later, he's got 2 big muscle men with him, and I look at him and I said, what's going on? Oh, we got to tear the floor up in the den, and that's the room where all the library was. And he says, the tile has asbestos in it. I said, yeah, but it's covered by a wall-to-wall carpet, and it's not cracked. There's no damage to it. If you want me to sign off so you can begin the restoration of your house, I got to take the floor up. So they don't come in with a putty knife and take the tiles up intact. They come in with 2 big pipe stanchions with wedges on the bottom. They proceed to smash the whole floor up. They don't cover anything, so there's now asbestos dust all through the house. I called the restoration company and I said to them, you got to come up here and see this, because this is off the wall wrong. No, don't worry about it, we'll take care of it. So it goes in a black bag in an unmarked white truck, and it's gone. And I go down to the building department in our town the next morning, because you don't do anything in our town without a permit. And I said, they have a permit? No, we don't give out asbestos permits. Done by Department of Labor, New York City. Really? Okay. So I called the young lady up who's in charge, and I described to her what went on. She says, all wrong. I said, I know it's all wrong. She said, who's the inspector? I said, she starts to giggle. And I said, you know this son of a bitch before I ran into him? She said, oh yeah, he's a bad boy. What do you mean bad boy? Well, he owes the state $150,000 in fines.
Whoa.
He's barred from doing any asbestos-related work in New York State. And he comes into court and says, I'm a poor man, I can't pay this. And the whole thing is a misdemeanor. With all the fuss they make about asbestos, it's a misdemeanor.
Really?
They won't go after him, his company, his truck, his car, nothing. They won't go after him. So at the end of the conversation, I thanked her very much, and I said, at the time I was 73, I said, I'm a 73-year-old retired pit bull. And I said, but after our conversation, I'm giving serious thoughts of going into the asbestos removal business, because I can make a lot of money and you can't do shit to me.
Yeah.
She didn't like that. The fee for that room would have been $2,000, the permit fee. So I called Travelers, our insurance company, who was Class A all the way. And I said, I'm not signing off for this, you don't pay this bill. 2 days later, from the adjuster between us and the insurance company, I get an email that says, be careful who you talk to or you may never get back in your home. I said to him, that's a threat. I said, you're finished on this job. Give me $5,000, I'll tear up the contract. I said, if I put my lawyer on your ass, you're going to pay for the entire restoration, and I'll make sure you're out of business. And he was a fireman, volunteer fireman. And so we got another man in who knew both the restoration company and this character. And he was through a family friend, and he said to me, they want you to come back in and do another whole cleaning for another $10,000. And I said, not going to happen. And he said, I know. He said, we're going to paint the walls, the floor, the ceiling, all white. It's all trapped. All the asbestos is trapped. They can't make an argument. Done. They're out of your hair. So I called Travelers and I said, why don't you go after this guy? Put him out of business. Because he's out the next day doing another home, screwing another insurance company. Now, we'd rather pay the $10,000 bill than to get involved with the lawyers and court costs to go after him. It's cheaper to pay the $10,000 bill.
Again and again and again? How does that work? Yeah.
I went to the Department of Health, they weren't interested. Weren't interested. And I went to the assistant district attorney and he said, very tough case. And I'm thinking to myself, you all get a piece of the action, that's why you're all doing this, and you all know this is going on, and nobody's saying anything.
Right.
And if the insurance company finds it as the cheapest place to go, you can understand that part of it. But that wasn't the only one. They sent in an electrician who would only go around the apartment with a little green probe that would either tell them there's power at that socket or there isn't power at that socket. So in rebuilding the kitchen, we removed one wall and put a steel beam across in place of it. But we rerouted cables to the front door for a set of switches. And this electrician says to me, I can't figure out what the cables are. I said, well, you're never going to do that with the little probe you have because you haven't belled out what wire up there is what wire down here. No, I got to get up in the attic, we got to run all new cables and we're going to put the switch over here instead of over there. And I said, no, we're not. We're finished, done. And the restoration guy says to me, what's going on? I said, this is the story he gives me, and then 2 weeks later, he comes back with a New York State inspector to inspect all the work he's done, and by that time I had restored the three-way circuit myself. And he's telling this inspector, oh, we took care of this and we took care of that. I had to button my lip because if I say anything, we wouldn't get the, the license. Right. Nightmare. And that was just the beginning. And then, of course, the storm came along, and half the work crews were working down at the shore. You couldn't get them. Right. So it was 2 years and 3 months that we had to rent another house for $2,500 a month plus utilities. And everything went out of the house in cartons. I packed the delicate equipment as best I could. A lot of work. And I'm still opening cartons because it was done so hastily that other people packed some of the cartons. And there was nothing notated on the cartons what was where.
And they wouldn't know what to write anyway. Well, I'm glad that's in the past, and good luck in the...
So we converted to gas,
yeah.
And we put in a chip for gas, and didn't hear anything almost a year. In the meantime, I'm running electric heaters in the winter to keep the house, the pipes from cracking. And finally I went down to the mayor's secretary because I used to do a lot of free video work for him. And I said, Mary, what the hell's going on? Oh, we have a running gun battle with National Grid. And I said, really? She said, yeah, they come in, they dig up the street, they don't patch it properly. So we now give them 2 jobs, and when they're finished with those jobs, we inspect them to make sure they're okay, and then we'll give them 2 more jobs. We happen to be number 150 on the list. Okay. Nice. So I said,
75
give me a break. I'm supporting the electric company with all these heaters, and I'm going to have cracked walls and all this. Can you put in a request for me? She said, yeah, I'll take care of it. She put in a verbal request, and in 3 weeks we had gas. And,
awesome.
And finally had heat.
Awesome.
But just...
Nightmare.
Nightmare. Ugh. And we had a they sent in this fellow from India. He was a good worker, but he wouldn't mask anything, and everything is hand done. I had to go back over everything, and you know, where the wall meets the ceiling and all, and take care of it because. So it was like, no, this is somebody's got to have a better way of doing this than this.
Wow,
but I still have the email from the agent, and one of these days I'm going to write a note to the papers saying, if you have a fire, this is what you need to do. Watch out for this. Watch out for that.
Right.
Because boy, homeowners are being taken left and right.
That's amazing.
And I worked at Mira Sound until 1970, until he decided he was going to open the second floor of the Henry Hudson Hotel up here, which is now all PBS. They took over the studios. He borrowed money from the wrong people. He videotaped the meeting, so he had them by the ball, so to speak. And finally, and I said to him in 70, keep the old studio and keep it running to help support what you're doing up at the other place. No. Up to here. He goes belly up bankrupt. Testified in bankruptcy court, and I said to the judge, if you turn them down and they go bankrupt, they got to go up and cut all the cables in the console so nobody can ever use it. He didn't give a damn. Put them into bankruptcy. They went up that day, and an hour later all the cables in the console were cut. Someone could take a lot of time. The one thing he did do is he bought was it an IRX machine that would, every 1 foot would mark what the cable was. So if you cut the cable somewhere, you just have to look for the two halves with the same number, and you could put them back together. I don't know if anybody ever restored the console, but I had built Pultec EQPs in a 4-gang, in the same chassis that Columbia used. I had more chassis made to put a whole Pultec EQP in each one of them. Worked beautifully. I don't know who wound up with all of it. I know Les Paul at one point wound up with the first 16-track machine. The first 24 we got from Ampex worked for about 2 or 3 hours, and the erase head cracked. And I said to Leon Wortman, how long did they run this machine, this 24-track, before they sent it to us? Because the head should have cracked on your time with the checkout, not on our time. So they wound up having to make 2 heads and stagger the time for record. Because all that heat in one stack wouldn't go. And of course the new machines had tape lifters on them, which ours didn't have. But that machine ran, God, it must have been 4 years, night and day, without a bit of maintenance of any consequence. It was a bulldozer. It would just keep on working. And it was good. And finally we could do things more or less in stereo, but up to that point the only mindset was everything was going to be mono. And a lot of people have told me they've heard He's So Fine in stereo, and I said unless they went back in the studio and redid it in stereo, the original wasn't stereo, it was mono. So, and we eventually got a better console at Allegro that could do stereo. But up to that point, everything was mono through these 2 little mixers. Clean as hell, because the mixer didn't add any coloration. It was a microphone in, microphone out. The 2 of them combined through a Longevin line amp, and then a push button. Which of the mono machines do you want to feed? And we could do overdubs. I would do, with Carole King on a demo, I'd do 6 and 7 overdubs. She'd play all the instruments. I mean, Mira Sound was a lot of makeshift. The talkback system was on the 2 contacts with alligator clips. So if the producer really stretched his feet out, he'd knock out the intercom. You'd have to get under and put the clips back on. But so it was...
He's So Fine in stereo, was that probably some kind of process stereo then? So they put some high frequencies and...
That's what I think they heard, but this person said, no, it was stereo.
Wow.
And I'm saying... now there was one fellow, Eddie, what the hell was his name? He was a roller skate fanatic who did cover records. And he would do cover records the next day of a hit record. And so maybe he pulled something like that, you know? But the original He's So Fine and the original Every Mother's Son were all mono. Because we didn't have a stereo machine in those days. And then Mickey and Sylvia broke up and it became Mickey and Kitty. And I have still in the library a couple of demos by them. If I had even given the thought at Allegro that the demos by Carole King,
right? If
you had those today, somebody must have them. If you had those today, you add strings to them. Oh, she did all the instruments herself. And in those days, it was funny because if you wanted to double the horns or brass, after the session was over, they'd get lost for an hour because the musician's inspector would come in and make sure the session was done. And then an hour later, the horns would come back in and we'd overdub them. And that was always a running gun battle.
Wait, so at the end of a session, somebody from the union would come in to confirm that the session...
No, nobody was working off the books. And these guys are perfectly willing to do that. But and some nice stuff was made by especially with Bob Crew. If you're going to work with Bob Crew, even 24 tracks isn't enough. Because he would add multiple hand claps, he would add tambourines, he would add foot stomps. So you had to keep in mind that what you were hearing on the session was far from what he was going to finish up with.
There's going to be a bunch added, so you better save some space.
So by that time, I used to, in my early days, had a variable speed record player, and I would take apart Les Paul's recordings to see what speed he did various things at. So I became very, very astute, very aware of how to build up mono, 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 mono. And Artie Butler, who was an arranger in those days at Regent, said to me one time, he said, I'd never worked with anybody that knew what the end product was going to sound like you have it exactly where I want it. And I said, I've done it so many times that I'm doing it in my sleep.
Cool. Now, when you said Carole King did all of the parts herself, all of the instruments herself, what do you mean?
She played drums, she played piano.
Really?
Played tambourine.
Horns?
I think she would do guitar once in a while, simple guitar.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, what she made was an excellent demo. And could easily be overdubbed today and be another album put out and they'd recoup the money 10 times over. You know?
Wow, sure.
Allegro had a big library, I mean probably close to 500 or 600 7-inch reels with 10 songs on each reel of demos. And everybody, and I read in Don's reply, what the hell was the guy's name? Short little black guy, talented as hell. He used to do the Elvis Presley demos. It wasn't Jimmy Breedlove. It was...
you want me to bring it up on the computer?
No. And he
I want to show you some stuff.
Okay. I brought a memory
Good.
along.
Good.
Because I'd be most interested to see Fred's pictures.
Yeah.
And he would do demo sessions, and boy, they would... And there was a set crew, Everett Barksdale, Sticks Evans, Dole Stickens. There was a set crew that would come in and almost invariably do the demos. And they had it down to a T. They could knock off 4 demos in 3 hours. Finished project.
What, are you a Mac guy or a PC?
I'm both, but I brought a unit that'll do the Mac.
Good, because I can give you just my iPhoto library, and then you'll have all the changes and you'll have all the sorting and everything, and we can start that going here.
Oh, okay.
Let me
one of the engineers, one of the maintenance men at Sony, took all my discs of the pictures and put them onto one.
Wow.
And it just fits.
Wow.
But it's got all the Frankie Valli, it's got all the pictures on it. Yeah, I got to send you that.
All historical stuff. Wow.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
And when the guys from Sony showed it to the what's the name of the Legacy or the old re-release stuff, they called me up and they said, "I want you to come out to dinner with us." And we sat around a table at a restaurant on 9th Avenue and 57th Street or 56th Street, and we talked about what sessions I had done. And they said to me, make them pay for it. And I said, I've never done that. I've never charged anybody anything for anything. And it just rubs me the wrong way. I'm just glad people can enjoy it. And so we, in the conversation, who was it, upstate New York has the record distributing house, Bob Orwin, is it? We're talking over the table, and he evidently does a lot of the re-releasing with Columbia. And he said to me, we wore out, literally wore out, I forget which master it was from Simon and Garfunkel. He said, we literally wore out the 2-track 15-inch master. And I said to him, you got Roy Halley back in to do it? Yeah. I said, Roy never mentioned my name? No. I said, because Roy knows I have 15-inch safeties of every one of those albums. We want to buy them from you, he says. No. I'm going to transfer them to high-def CDs, and I'll give you the tape. I don't want to get involved in some bean counter at Columbia that's got nothing else to do in his law profession than to grip me upside, you know, from having a copy of the tape. But everything I worked on, I have safeties of, even all my own stuff.
Cool.
But there's nothing like the 15-inch 2-track originals. And especially the Broadway shows. Yeah, I enjoyed my years at Columbia. It's too bad it didn't run longer. And we survived the I forget what year it was it 65? The big blackout with the whole eastern part of the company? And so we couldn't do any work, so we went down onto the street and we opened up the subway grates, and people were coming up out of the subway grates, and we were telling them, welcome to Queens, but they weren't in Queens, they hadn't gotten where they stopped. And he said to me, we wore out, literally wore out, I forget which master it was from Simon and Garfunkel. He said, we literally wore out the 2-track 15-inch master. And I said to him, you got Roy Halley back in to do it? Yeah. I said, Roy never mentioned my name? No. I said, because Roy knows I have 15-inch safeties of every one of those albums. We want to buy them from you, he says. No. I'm going to transfer them to high-def CDs, and I'll give you the tape. I don't want to get involved in some bean counter at Columbia that's got nothing else to do in his law profession than to grip me upside, you know, from having a copy of the tape. But everything I worked on, I have safeties of, even all my own stuff.
Cool.
But there's nothing like the 15-inch 2-track originals. And especially the Broadway shows. Yeah, I enjoyed my years at Columbia. It's too bad it didn't run longer. And we survived the I forget what year it was it 65? The big blackout with the whole eastern part of the company? And so we couldn't do any work, so we went down onto the street and we opened up the subway grates, and people were coming up out of the subway grates, and we were telling them, welcome to Queens, but they weren't in Queens, they hadn't gotten where they stopped.